Welcome back, everyone. My name is Lindy Johnson. This is Kristen, and this is Charlie. And this session, we are going to talk about, it's going to be hard to wrap this up, but we're going to try to dive in a short amount of time, talking about managing our own bias and emotions during an advocacy time, right, with EMA. So let's start with, what do we mean by bias? What is that?
I have a
Did you Google it? Do we have an actual definition?
I have a definition.
Let's start there.
I forgot that was my job. Bias is prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way that is considered to be unfair. A second definition is cause to feel or show inclination or prejudice for or against someone or something.
Okay. So we've been talking here, and I'd love to hear from each of you, like, what is either a personal example in your own life where you noticed a bias playing out and impacting in one way or the other? Mm-hmm. And then I want to tie it to, where does it play out during advocacy when walking alongside moms? So I'll let you, do you want to start us off?
Yeah,
Kristen?
I'll be vulnerable and share. So there's actually a time when I had a bias again. So I was traveling, I was by myself, I was in the South, and I remember I had a fear of where I was, and based on the location I was in and the people and the way that they looked, and I perceived them to be a certain way. And then I was then again, the fear just added on to it. And I still ended up engaging with the community and doing what I set out to do. And while I did that, I learned that the thoughts I had were actually dead wrong. The fears I had, or the way I thought people would treat me because of how they looked, or how I should navigate, was actually not accurate to the reality of the situation. And as I just took a step back and reflected on that after the entire experience, I realized, whoa, I had a bias. Like, I went in, I didn't recognize it in the moment, but I went in assuming something about somebody based on where they lived, based on the way that they looked. And that was beginning to dictate my reaction and action in that community. And thankfully, I was not only wrong, but I experienced that the exact opposite of what I thought would happen happened, or the exact opposite of how I thought these people or this community would react to me was the case. And so for me, it just let me know I'm not perfect, but I try to remember the power of bias and not let it interfere with how I'm going to work with people. And yet still, this was a scenario where fear took control, and I could look back and say, wow, I had a bias against a group of people I'd never met, that had never met me. And I went in and robbed myself of an experience because I thought I knew what would happen. And thankfully I learned the opposite. And so it was a lesson learned for me of just, that was a natural, not a work experience, just a life experience where bias came in. And I think at the root, there's always a root to a bias. And for me, that root was a fear. And it just grew and grew and grew. And it robbed me of being able to enjoy something to the fullest because I just have my preconceived ideas. And so that's a personal example, how that can play out at EMA. I think we are meeting people that we have not met before, obviously, for the first time, that maybe have walked a walk that's different than my own in a similar situation that I was in this personal example. And we're pairing up in an intimate relationship. We're pairing up to get close with each other. And we might have the opportunity to read on paper a little bit about this person if I'm in the seat of an advocate. And it's going to be very easy to develop a bias based on very minimal information, whether I have written information or not. But what I think this person's life experience was like without asking and seeking clarity, or what I have seen other people's life experiences to be like. And then, so at the beginning of a relationship is when a bias can begin to take root. And that's when we have to be willing to self-reflect and not let it. Because the one thing I've learned is that it will often rob us. And it'll rob another person, the person on the other side of that bias, from so much as well. And so when it can start at any point in a relationship as an advocate at EMA, but very likely at the very beginning when you don't know this person, you're not familiar, it's your first time maybe advocating, so you're not familiar with what the steps are like. We just have to be willing to stop, reflect, and ask, am I speaking on truth? Am I thinking on truth? Have I sought for clarity or
Yeah.
even understanding
Yeah.
from this person or from this community group before I'm making these judgment calls, and then what's at the root of it, and is
Mhm.
it fair, is it true to what is actually before me? And if we're able to do that, I think we can take back this power of being fully present,
Mhm.
and being in life together, and
Yeah.
not letting these silly things build walls and barriers between us. And that's where like healing on so many levels begins to take place, when just people come together.
Yeah.
And we're able to love and be loved by each other.
Yeah. I love that.
So strong.
What do you want to add to that, Charlie?
I would say I totally agree and relate similar personal situation. Matt and I had fostered for a couple of years, and one of the little boys we fostered family came forward about 9 months. And they were very poor.
Mm.
And I remember going into that situation thinking like, no way we could provide this kid such a better life.
Sure.
And this was like early onset of foster care experiences. And we went to that court. The family was there. We met them. And the judge said, why should we consider placing this child in your home? And the grandfather stood up and was like, we believe this child deserves a chance to know his family. And so long story short, his like witness and testimony in that court that day, the scales just fell from my eyes.
Wow.
Where I came in with like sort of puffed up, like we know what's best for this kid.
Yeah.
And left deflated in the best of ways of like, I cast so much judgment on people I never met. And they are some of our truest friends today. And we still have a relationship with this family. See them very regularly.
Yeah.
And to think that like, had I had kept and held on to this prejudice and this bias against this other family because of something like an income level.
Sure.
Or the ability to provide a loving, healthy, safe home that I was dead wrong on, we today would not have a relationship. If I had let my pride and my prejudice stand in the way of it harms relationship at the end of the day.
Yeah.
When like these are real people that if we entered in with a blank space, and then it changes. And back to Ema, like one thing I always advise advocates to do is have that conversation with mom on session 1.
Yeah.
To say, hey, I read your bio, which is very small. I mean, we do ask a lot of questions, but at the end of the day, can you imagine our entire lives being summarized in 650 words?
Totally.
And like a series of 100 questions where it's like, I read your file, so I have some context, but blank slate. I want to hear everything about you that you want me to know, that you think I should know from you.
Yeah.
Like let her paint her own picture and believe her.
Right.
And her story and her perspective.
Good. Yeah. So I'd love to just like get practical too of based on you all's time with Ema and serving our team and serving advocates, like what are potential moments where the bias can intersect? Like what are some maybe like common be on the lookout for, be cautious of? Like what comes to mind when we're walking alongside mom?
I'd say the beginning.
Yeah.
The onset of the relationship is all because there is not a relationship.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to when you're like you don't know this person.
Yeah.
You're a stranger. She's a stranger. And I feel like that's when the prejudice and pride manifest in us the most.
I think also towards the middle, when you start to build a relationship and maybe the mom begins to share more about her life and she shares a detail that you didn't know, or a detail that you wouldn't have agreed with, or that makes you uncomfortable. And at that moment is when we have to, again, check ourselves on how am I reacting to this? Why am I reacting the way that I am? And is there a bias attached to it? And just being willing, it's like, what are the steps then once we've addressed like, oh, there might be a bias or opportunity for it. What do I do to counter that? And I think is one, you go in with grace. Judgment, I think, is huge, is we recognize that there's no value in judging people. We should get to know them and then show up with grace on the other side of that, but then go in with curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Ask questions if
Right.
there are questions to be asked, but then to just know that this is a different life experience.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be worse or better than your own. It's just a different life experience. And so letting that just exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like it probably in the beginning and the middle, and I'd
And
add the
at
end.
Yes.
Because when it comes to, we talked a little bit about this, but if what are my expectations and
Right.
goals for you? And if at the end of this you didn't do you didn't achieve that, you didn't make the progress I thought you would, not letting that now shape how we see and view mom, but also how we see and view other moms like that mom.
Yeah.
Where she now represents this entire, you sort of blanket this entirety of this demographic
Mm-hmm.
as they're all like,
Mm.
none of them are going to make, no moms in this situation that might be single, might be experiencing levels of, economic insecurity and whatnot.
Right.
That now, like, don't let that experience shape how you see this entire people group either. But even before that, identifying progress, like, is that our expectations and goals of this advocacy relationship is different from yours.
I want to keep us going though.
Yeah.
So with that, a couple things that I want to talk about to kind of get us going towards wrapping up. Also, it's like, man, there's a lot of meat here. I think keeping the spectrum, right, of like, if I'm the advocate, being mindful that like my bias could be a belief about people who are late.
Mm-hmm.
It could be the like language and words that you use to describe whatever, your day, your relationships, your kids, whatnot, to like your financial status,
Yeah.
right? Like to your example that you gave, to your appearance, right? It could be as minute as people who are late. They don't care.
Totally.
They're lazy bums. Like it could be as kind of, I don't know, minor, I guess, as that. Not that that's minor, but maybe compared to my belief about you if you make X amount of money.
Yeah.
Or below a marker of money or whatnot. So I think like that, like let's open the spectrum, right? And just bring our awareness to that. Another question I have is like, so what's the risk if we're not aware? If we don't practice the like looking in the mirror, the surrounding ourselves with people who can like call us on stuff if that's appropriate, the pausing to check, kind of like when you went to court that day and heard this and the scales came off, right? So what's the risk if we don't do that? What's the risk when we're walking alongside mom and we're serving her in this program?
Yeah.
There's a cost.
Well, I want to double click on, they hate when I say that. I want to double click on that.
Yeah.
Because I think that's super important that we need to be aware of the bias that we project, and also that there's biases that we are actually receiving.
Yeah.
So moms that we serve they're probably coming in with their own bias about
Totally.
you.
That's good.
And that's real and that's there. And we need to be aware of that. That like you
Yeah.
might see me in this lens that might be not true of me. And so we're painting a picture of ourselves too.
Yes. Yes.
And that's like at the early onset.
absolutely.
So,
No, that's a good, like it is two-sided.
totally.
Maybe she's been served by services before and she's like, just another
Oh my
caseworker,
God.
just another
Yes.
person who looks different than me, just
Yeah.
another person who thinks that they can fix it for me. Right. So yeah, she can have her whole landscape as well.
Yeah,
You're gonna
that's
have
an opportunity.
Yeah, and for me, when I'm advocating for a mom, I like on the very first time that we're actually meeting and getting to talk that I explain explicitly that I'm not here to fix.
Yeah.
I use clear language like I'm here to support, and so I want you to know that that's my role.
Mhm.
And so for us to have an understanding of what is our role as an advocate and then not being afraid and more so being willing to just express that openly, because if mom does have that bias, which is understandable, is because that then comes, I would hear it as it's very vulnerable
Yeah.
to step
is.
in. And I'm looking at, okay, this person's here. Are they going to be tracking every move I make? Is it bad? Are they observing if I'm a good mom or I'm not a good mom? Like there's a lot of questions that I imagine a mom has when she enters the program, which she is trusting us. And so there's so much strength in the courage that she has to take that step. But as an advocate, I look at how can I communicate to her what my hope is truly what is going to be happening in this. And so I will use that language of you're not someone that needs to be fixed, and that's not my role in any of this. I saw that you have an action plan. I'd love to hear why you chose those things, or
Yeah.
how can I support you, and making it clear, like, my role here is, hey, I'm gonna bring us through this curriculum. I have this book, you have this book, and we're gonna walk through it together. But I'm also available for you to share
That's
openly
good.
whatever you're comfortable sharing, but don't feel like you have to share.
Yeah.
And that's a simple but I think practical step, is have that conversation.
Yeah.
Have it on the front end.
Yeah, totally. And to not be offended by it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not personal.
Yeah.
Totally.
It's an opportunity to reintroduce yourself and represent you and only you, and everything you just said, Kristen, is right on.
Yeah.
And maybe normalizing, like, even on the front end of asking point blank, like, hey, what questions do you have of me? What
Yeah.
concerns do you have of the role you think I play? Right? Like normalizing, giving them,
Mhm.
like, you have the mic too. Like,
Yes. That's
you
good.
can ask me just as much as I might be asking you.
Yeah.
Um,
The risk.
yes.
Is
What's the risk
sort
if
of-
we're not aware?
Yeah. I mean, I think that we have to understand in the space of the helping field, the
Yeah.
social service, that there is a level of power, and I think someone used the word authority, that is very real and present, where you have the helped and the helping, and sometimes that was like that scale feels off.
Yeah.
And with that being said, whether or not like that is perceived,
Yes.
right?
Sure.
So the risk is that my bias as an advocate that is helping, and even that word I hesitate to use, but that is there to like serve and support, if it could be perceived as like you have power,
Mm-hmm.
then our bias can be really dangerous
Yeah.
and crushing of a human spirit.
Yeah.
Like I can have a bias against, I made the joke earlier, my sister has red hair. I can have a bias against redheads and think that they get angry really easy. I'm exposing myself. And my sister could care less.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't affect her.
Yeah.
But my bias against someone that there's this relationship here, it does affect you, because I'm writing session reports about you, and
Yeah.
I'm representing you, and I'm advocating for you.
And I'm the one coming saying, I need help or support in some form or
Totally.
fashion.
Totally.
So I feel like I'm in the vulnerable seat here.
Yes, it is. It's an incredible talk by Andy Crouch about authority and vulnerability. And he describes authority as capacity for meaningful action.
Yeah.
And so we reframe the authority as that,
Mm-hmm.
not as, it's so hard to talk about, not as even this position of like power and privilege, but like channeling, if there is power and privilege, channeling that for capacity, like to lift the person next to me higher,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
not to domineer over you, not to use my own judgments and prejudices to gain.
Yeah.
But I'm actually like, my entire motivation is to love and serve you.
Right.
And that's what it's going to feel like to be on the other side of me, which is really hard to do.
Yeah. Well, and back to kind of like the risk or the cost, if we're not asking these questions, like kind of trying to open our eyes to this, is if I'm working with mom, I risk her ability to trust me. And have a cadence like in our relationship where we've got to build the trust and the relational equity to love and care and support her well, right? And for her to receive the care, even if it's just care, right?
Yeah.
Like we're not doing anything, we're not solving your problems, so we risk that, and that's vital for, for growth,
Yeah.
for healing, for movement forward, and whatever that looks like in her life. And the cost if we don't too. It's like if we're not aware of that, we could crush
Yeah.
unknowingly.
Yep.
And ambiguously maybe, right?
Sure.
Like, so all that to say, there's a lot we could go into here, and we'll probably have more. But I want to wrap up. I know in our advocate training in the past, like we've had this conversation of kind of this like picture experience, right? Of like mom's home. I was wondering if one of you could just kind of like briefly kind of paint that picture, ask the questions, reflect what typically we hear, but what it might actually be as it uncovers bias. Who wants to take it?
Is this the the
Yeah,
five
the
senses?
senses.
Kristen, you lead this so well.
Take it away.
So you want to go through the 4?
Like,
Yeah,
just describe the activity.
Okay.
Just kind of like walk us through it.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, we actually, and this was an example I could have also used for myself because we have an activity called the 4 senses. And the first time the activity was done.
5 senses.
Got a lot
I
of
said
senses.
4. I said 4.
You're good. You're good.
The 5 senses. we all have 5 senses. And the first time we did it, I fell on the side of where we want people typically to fall, but is not the place we want people to stay. And so we want to ask, we paint a picture, and we can do it right here, is if you were to envision a mom who, let's say she's in her 20s, she's a single parent and she works at a fast food restaurant, maybe. She doesn't have a vehicle and she goes to and from work by foot or through public transit. What would you say on her everyday interactions is something that she smells? And we will list a bunch of stuff, and you can list it in your mind right now. What would you say that she often touches? As we listed, it could be, the greasy food, or, the floor,
dirty
dirty
diapers.
diapers. What is she hearing? So we're going through the 5 senses: smell, touch, hearing. So we're hearing cries, we're hearing customers, we're hearing violence, we're hearing fighting in a neighborhood, and we're making all these assumptions based on a little bit of information that we have: her age, her relational status, where she's working. And so we're looking at touch, we're looking at smell, we're looking at what she's hearing, we're looking at what she's tasting, and we're making assumptions on taste. And then for our 5th sense,
Seeing.
help me out. Thank you. Seeing.
I know. It's hard to do in order.
Seeing what she sees, we're going to make an assumption.
Yeah.
And so the natural reaction is we're thinking, okay, a woman in this situation she's surrounded by negativity. She's surrounded by negative things. But the reality is we don't know that to be true. And the flip side of this example, or this activity, is we begin to list a bunch of other things that mom could be seeing. What if she's seeing beautiful flowers because she walks by a garden that she's planted? What if she's touching soft blankets because she's bought a soft blanket for her child? We have mentioned in this that she's also pregnant. What if she's touching her belly, or if she's smelling a home-cooked meal? Some things that are pleasant, things that we would assume are pleasant. And what happens is we begin to recognize that our natural bend is to go towards a negative.
Yeah.
Especially if we're hearing things that we think might be a negative, which to someone else might not be. We're gonna fill the gaps of other things that. But what we can do that is not as natural, but we still can do, is to find the strengths or find the positives in a scenario, in everyone's scenario. And so we go into a situation with our moms at EMA, and we have moms. No mom is the same. Every story is different, no matter how similar it might look to somebody else's. But we let her fill the gaps. We won't fill those gaps. And we don't assume that all the gaps are going to be filled with something that's negative.
Right.
But there's great strengths in her story. There's beautiful moments in her life, and she is a mom who loves her children, which is why she is here. And she is a strong woman, because it is not easy to say, hey, I need some support. I think all of us could agree with that. And yet she has courageously done that. And so she's got strength, she's got grit, she's got love for her children, she's got community around her. And we're one piece of that community, but we rob the ability to step in, to serve, to love, to get to know somebody, to be there in a time of need, when we just approach it thinking we have the answer. We know what your story is like. We know that your life must be this hard and this bleak, when that's actually not true. And it's not fair.
Yeah. If you are in the role of supporter and advocate, that is a great responsibility.
It is.
And it's a heavy weight, and it's a privilege. And it's it's your glass ball. Like, don't drop it.
Yeah.
And so to frame it in that way of like, I'm not only encouraged to be aware of my bias. Right. I'm actually responsible in this seat.
Yeah.
Because on the other side of that, of my bias, is a lot of harm. And it's a heavy weight.
Yep. I think the best way to, if I'm like, I don't know where I am, right? I think the best next steps is like surrounding yourself with people right? To be the like human mirror, to invite like those questions, those challenging conversations. Maybe it's in your personal life. Maybe it's with our support team, like our case managers, of being like, hey, can I just like digest this? Is this interfering, right? Like if we're still learning and trying to grow our awareness, I think it's like, you've got to bring people into that to learn that, and to like start using that muscle and taking the scales off. I think the second piece is also like bring the conversation in with mom, right? Like giving her the floor. What questions does she have about you, right? Like open the floor that you guys get to learn about each other, because you're both learning.
Totally.
And we want to like model like that level playing field or floor or whatnot of like it's not a me and you. It's like we're here. We're just like, we're walking together. So anyway, I think those are two things to kind of wrap it up of, obviously there's a lot of risk if we're not. Ways to grow that is bringing in the people, and then normalize, like she gets asked questions too of you. If she has skepticisms of you, if she's got concerns, fears, like normalize that. Ask her if there's anything she wants to bring to the table. Let her know it's an open door, and you'd be glad to like talk through it.
Yeah.
So those are two things that come to mind. Anything you'd want to add?
No.
All right.
Got it.
Lots here.
Yes.
We'll probably have this one a couple more times, but ultimately we hope that was helpful for you on your advocate journey.